Another dramatic, emotional day in the court in the George Zimmerman murder trial. Jurors saw images of Trayvon Martin's body taken in the moments just after he was shot and heard powerful testimony from a first responder who attempted to save him. CNN's Martin Savage was inside the courtroom today. He's joining us now with the latest details. Martin.
Hello, Wolf. Yeah, day 2 of this trial transported that courtroom back to that night. Would have been February 26, 2012. For the first time, jurors in the George Zimmerman murder trial saw the body of the teenager he shot, Trayvon Martin, and heard graphic testimony from one of the first responders to the scene that night.
Did you attempt to see if Trayvon Martin was still alive?
Yes, sir. I attempted to get his pulse, sir.
Did you detect a pulse on Trayvon Martin?
No, sir, I did not.
Sergeant Anthony Raimondo and another officer attempted CPR on the 17-year-old.
I breathed for Mr. Martin, or I tried to, sir.
What was your role in that, the CPR attempts on Trayvon Martin?
I was doing breaths, sir.
In the courtroom, Martin's mother sat stoically listening to the last moments of her son's life. Earlier in the day, when the jury was out of the courtroom, the defense and the prosecution fought over phone calls.
He's got something in his hands.
The famous call George Zimmerman made the night he killed Trayvon Martin has been widely heard, but not calls like this one to police.
We've had some break-ins in my neighborhood, and there's a real suspicious guy.
Police records show Zimmerman made dozens of phone calls over the years reporting things he found suspicious.
Something's wrong with him.
The state wants to introduce 6 from the last 6 months prior to the fatal night, including one where he repeats a now well-known line. They always get away.
They always get away.
Prosecutors want to show Zimmerman is becoming increasingly frustrated over seeing people he perceived as suspicious eluding police. The state contends Zimmerman followed 17-year-old Trayvon Martin to make sure this time he wouldn't get away.
His actions and behavior that night are very different from his other actions.
The defense says any calls Zimmerman made prior to that night are irrelevant.
They're going to be asking this jury to make a quantum leap from good, responsible citizen behavior to seething anger.
Of course, the defense maintains that it was Trayvon Martin that began all of this by attacking George Zimmerman, and George Zimmerman simply acted in self-defense. It should be pointed out the judge has yet to rule on whether those other phone calls will be allowed into the court and for the jury to hear.
Yeah, that's a sensitive issue. Martin, thanks very much. Let's dig a little bit deeper with CNN legal correspondent Jean Casares. Jean, how likely is it that the dramatic images that were shown today of Trayvon Martin's body, some of the graphic testimony, it's obviously going to have an impact on those 6 jurors?
It definitely has to. Obviously, the evidence is what is important. The jury will be told when they deliberate they cannot go by their emotions. But that room was filled with emotion today because all of a sudden, as Martin said, you were taken back to the scene of February 26th, and you saw Trayvon Martin, you saw his body, you saw the gunshot. You didn't see any blood on his hands, you didn't see any other marks on him. But he was dead. And then in stark contrast, the crime scene investigator also took pictures of George Zimmerman not too much later when he went to the police department. He looked immaculate. It didn't seem as though he had a wound on him. And so that was their first image in that courtroom. Then on cross-examination, the defense brought out all the photos of the back of George Zimmerman's head. And he had been cleaned up by the crime scene techs and the fire officials there. But you saw the bumps, you saw the lumps, you saw the blood. And it's just interesting to look because you're looking at the evidence here, and the devil's going to be in the details, Wolves. The inconsistencies with George Zimmerman's stories as to the position of Trayvon Martin's body on the grass. The evidence is continuing to be developed.
It's going to be in the hands of 6 women, the 6 jurors in this trial. And you know, Trayvon Martin's parents, they're out there, they're sitting in the courtroom, they're weeping, they're pretty distraught that they're seeing what's going on. That potentially could have an impact on the jurors as well.
It does. It really does. It's not supposed to, but they are sitting on the side of the jury. But do you know what is really limiting the view today is that the clothes of Trayvon Martin and the clothes of George Zimmerman, I've never seen this done before. They are like between plastic with great big frames around them. It is so huge that it, I think, really impacts the view of the jury to the family of Trayvon Martin. And they were shown to the jury today, too, the clothes that Trayvon Martin was wearing.
We heard Martin talk about these 6 other 911 calls that George Zimmerman made. They were played for the judge. They weren't played for the jurors. But why does the prosecution, what's their goal right now in getting these earlier 911 calls admitted as evidence?
You know, Wolf, this could be so critical for the prosecution because this is second-degree murder. They don't have to prove intent to kill, but they do have to prove a depraved mind, ill will, hatred, spite on the part of George Zimmerman toward Trayvon Martin. Well, he didn't know Trayvon Martin, but they want these calls to come before the jury so the jury can hear all these different phone calls the months before where George Zimmerman, when he's asked, though, he says he's black, and he says he looks suspicious, and he also repeats they always get away, to show that that state of mind was building, building, building. And finally, on February 26th, he didn't stay in his house anymore. He was in his car, and he pursued him, unlike he did any of the others, but it got to that boiling point where he just had to do something and take the law into his own hands. That's what the prosecution wants to show.
Jean Casares reporting for us from outside the courthouse in Sanford, Florida. We'll stay in close touch with you, Jean. Thanks very much.